Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a story that, it feels like something straight out of a movie.
Oh, yeah.
It all takes place in the Hamptons.
Okay.
So picture this. A successful financier
Right.
found dead in his mansion.
Mm-hmm.
It's a story filled with wealth betrayal and maybe even revenge.
Mm-hmm.
So get ready because we're going deep into the murder of Ted Ammon.
This case, it has so many twists and turns.
It really does.
Where do you even begin with something like this?
Well, I think you have to start with Ted himself.
Okay.
I mean, this is a guy who built his fortune on Wall Street.
Yeah.
But the thing that gets me is he never even went to law school.
Really?
And yet he still managed to pass the bar exam.
Wow.
So, talk about ambition.
That's not just some random fact,
Right,
Think about it. To pass the bar without formal legal training,
right.
I mean, it takes a sharp mind, a serious drive to succeed, and
Yeah.
maybe even a willingness to, well, bend the rules.
Interesting.
I mean, does that sound like someone who'd be an easy target?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
There's definitely more to him than meets the eye.
For sure.
And then there's the whole issue with his marriage to Generosa.
Oh, yeah. Things were not good there.
No, they were not.
It sounds messy.
We're talking a very bitter divorce
Yeah.
and accusations of infidelity.
Right. I mean, divorce is rarely pretty,
True.
especially when you're talking about serious wealth.
Exactly.
Generosa, she suspected Ted of cheating,
Right.
and she was determined to get what she felt she deserved in the settlement.
Yeah. And then enters Danny Pelosi.
Generosa's new love interest.
Exactly. And his background is completely different from Ted's world.
Definitely a clash of lifestyles there.
Totally. Danny was a high school dropout, and suddenly he's in this world of luxury.
Yeah, that's a big contrast, and you have to wonder about their connection.
What do you mean?
Well, was it really love, or was there something else going on?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Right, like
Uh,
was there maybe an ulterior motive there?
Okay, so let's get to the murder itself.
Right.
Ted was found murdered in his Hamptons home.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just a simple attack.
No, it was brutal.
He was bludgeoned to death.
30 to 35 blows to the head.
It's chilling.
Absolutely. And the fact that there was no sign of forced entry or
Yes.
robbery.
It points to something personal.
This wasn't random.
No.
Someone wanted Ted dead.
So we've got a love triangle, a contentious divorce, and a brutal murder.
It's a lot.
Generosa and Danny are definitely in the spotlight.
They had motive for sure.
Right. But is that enough to make them the prime suspects?
Well, it's a good place to start.
Sure.
Don't forget, Generosa was set to inherit a significant amount from Ted's estate.
Oh, that's right. And Danny as her lover.
He would benefited too.
Okay, so this is where it gets even more interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
Right before the murder, Danny hired a company to install a video surveillance system in Ted's mansion.
Interesting. Why would he do that?
Right, that's the big question.
Was he genuinely concerned for Generosa's safety?
Maybe knowing how angry Ted was.
Or was it something more calculated, like trying to cover his tracks?
Things are getting complicated.
The plot thickens.
So how did investigators even begin to handle all of this?
It wasn't easy, that's for sure.
And were there any other potential suspects besides Danny and Generosa?
Well, that's a story for the next part.
Ooh, can't wait.
This case, it really gripped the nation,
Oh, I can imagine.
It was like a glimpse into this world of wealth and privilege.
And it all went wrong.
It did. So we'll get into all of that next time. But for now,
Right.
think about this. If you were an investigator, what would you focus on?
Good question.
What seems most important to you?
Okay, I'll be thinking about that.
Yeah, hold on to that thought and we'll be back soon with more.
Sounds good. I'm ready for part 2. Okay, so we left off with the investigators trying to figure out who was responsible for Ted's murder.
Yeah, it was a complicated case.
So where did things go from there?
Well, the media was all over this story.
I bet.
I mean, it was a huge scandal.
Right.
So there was a lot of pressure on the police to get answers.
It wasn't just a crime.
No, this was something that really shook up the whole Hamptons community.
Wow, so did they ever narrow down the suspects?
Well, not right away.
Hmm.
Despite all the suspicion surrounding Generosa and Danny, they weren't immediately charged.
Really?
In fact, Generosa ended up inheriting a big chunk of Ted's estate.
Hold on. She inherited millions, even though she was a suspect.
Yeah, it definitely raised some eyebrows.
I can imagine. Did that affect the investigation?
Well, it added to all the speculation, but inheriting money doesn't automatically make you a murderer.
Of course not.
The investigators still needed solid evidence to prove anything.
That makes sense.
And as time went on, Generosa and Danny's relationship fell apart.
Oh, wow. So now we have a wealthy widow,
Yeah.
A suspicious ex-lover?
Yeah, and a whole lot of unanswered questions.
What happened to Danny after he and Generosa split up?
He didn't just disappear.
Okay.
Years went by and the case went cold.
Hmm.
And then, out of nowhere, Danny was arrested,
But it was...
charged with Ted Ammon's murder.
Talk about a plot twist. What happened? Did they find new evidence?
It wasn't exactly a smoking gun,
Okay.
but the prosecution, they felt they had enough to go to trial.
Really, just based on what we talked about earlier.
They pointed to Danny's potential motives, his inconsistent statements,
Okay.
and that whole thing with the surveillance system.
Right, so they were relying on circumstantial evidence.
Exactly, meaning there was no direct proof he was at the crime scene.
Or that he actually did it.
It was a risky strategy for sure.
So what did Danny's defense team say?
They argued that the prosecution's case was weak,
Okay.
based on speculation and lacking any real proof. They insisted that Danny was innocent.
And that the real killer was still out there.
Right, it was a classic legal battle.
With both sides making their arguments.
And ultimately, it was up to the jury to decide.
So what did they decide?
What was their verdict?
It's always so intense, when it gets to the jury,
Yeah.
having to decide someone's fate like that.
Right, because they have to believe that, beyond a reasonable doubt.
Exactly. So what happened in Danny's case?
Well, after weeks of, testimony and all the arguments,
Right.
the jury, they found Danny Pelosi guilty
Oh, wow.
of second-degree murder.
Okay, so that means...
It means they didn't think it was planned in advance,
Uh-huh.
but they did believe that he intended to cause Ted serious harm.
And that ultimately that harm led to his death.
Exactly, and he ended up being sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Wow. 25 years to life.
That's a long time.
It really is. So after everything, the investigation, the trial, did that bring any closure to the case?
It's hard to say, really, because the verdict, it caused a lot of debate.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Some people felt that justice had been served,
Right.
but others, they weren't so sure.
Like they didn't think the evidence was strong enough.
Yeah, they questioned whether Danny was actually guilty.
It's interesting how even after a trial, there can still be so much doubt.
That's the thing about these complex cases,
Yeah.
They're always unanswered questions.
Like, what about Generosa's role in all of this?
Right, she was never charged, but
Right.
she clearly had issues with Ted.
And her connection to Danny is...
It's definitely suspicious.
So did she have anything to do with the murder?
Did she know more than she let on?
We might never know the answer to that.
Probably not.
It's crazy how money, love, and betrayal can become so dangerous.
This whole story, it shows that even in a place like the Hamptons,
Right, with all the wealth and glamour.
things can go very wrong,
It's a reminder that darkness can be found anywhere.
and that money can't protect you from it.
That's for sure. So what do you think is the biggest takeaway from this case?
Well, for me, it's a cautionary tale about relationships
Okay.
and the destructive power of greed and resentment.
It's also a reminder that even when we seek justice...
The truth can be hard to find.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the murder of Ted Ammon.
It was a wild one.
A story of wealth, betrayal, and ultimately murder.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
It does. So if you were an investigator on this case, what would you have focused on?
Good question. What piece of evidence or testimony would have stood out to you?
I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, share your theories with us. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.